The class list updated on a Tuesday. Grin noticed it first. He was already at his seat in room 7 of the Academy Station Verith, 20 minutes early, reviewing the semester material. He liked being first. He liked knowing what was coming. It was how he had stayed at the top of this course for 2 full semesters. Then he saw the new name on the roster, Dara Wolf. Species, human. Homeworld, Earth. That he turned to Talus, who had just walked in and was settling into the seat beside him with the slow, easy movement of someone who had never been in a hurry in their life. "There is a human joining the course," Grin said. Talus looked at the roster projected on the wall. "So there is. This is Advanced Bladecraft," Grin said. "Level 4. I can read the course name," Talus said. Grin clicked his mandibles once, his species version of a skeptical noise. Humans were not a species the galaxy dismissed easily. He knew that. Everyone knew that. But Bladecraft was not a physical contest. It was precision. It was theory and material science, and the kind of patience that came from long academic training. He had never heard of humans being particularly noted for any of that. Talus said nothing more. He pulled out his study tablet and started reading. The room filled slowly. 8 students total, counting the new edition, 6 different species, all of them accepted into the course through competitive application. Grin had scored in the top 4% of applicants. He was quietly proud of that. Dara Wolf arrived last. There was nothing dramatic about it. The door opened. She walked in. She found an empty seat near the back. She was smaller than Grin had expected. Humans are not a large species, but something about the way she moved made her seem like she was taking up exactly the space she needed and no more. Her hands rested on the desk in front of her. He could see scars on them from across the room. Old ones. The kind that did not come from accidents, but from long, repeated work. She did not look around the room with curiosity. She just waited. Instructor Soval entered exactly on time. He was Velhuri, tall, silver-skinned, with the kind of calm that came from decades of teaching a subject he genuinely loved. He set his materials down, looked at the class once, and began. "Bladecraft," he said, "is not about cutting. Any sharp edge can cut. What we study here is the relationship between the maker, the material, and the purpose. By the end of this course, you will understand that a blade is a record of every decision made to create it." He moved through the opening lecture with practiced ease. Force line theory, stress distribution across different alloy compositions, the physics of edge geometry. The alien students followed without difficulty. Most of them had covered the basics in lower courses. Dara took notes on paper. Not a tablet, not a hollow surface. A physical notebook with a pencil worn down to a short stub. Grin watched her from the corner of his eye. The writing was small and neat, and she did not look up very often. Partway through the session, Soval asked each student the same question. It was something he did at the start of every semester. "What brought you to Bladecraft?" The answers came around the room. Grin spoke about structural engineering principles and how blades were the purest expression of load management in a handheld object. Another student talked about her species' ceremonial tradition. One spoke about military career requirements. The answers were clean and considered. When Soval reached Dara, she looked up from her notebook. "I grew up using them," she said. Soval waited. The class waited. She did not add anything. Soval moved on. The second half of the session was the first practical exercise. Not a forging session, just design. Students were given access to the holographic design tables and asked to produce a basic schematic for a single-edged blade of their choosing. The goal was to demonstrate familiarity with the design tools and basic understanding of proportion. Every student moved to a hollow table and began working with the projected interface, pulling measurements, adjusting geometry, running stress simulations. Dara did not use the hollow table. She stayed at her desk, opened her notebook to a blank page, and began to draw. By hand, with the worn pencil. Grin glanced over. The sketch was not what he expected. It was not rough or careless. The lines were confident, drawn without hesitation. But there were no measurement annotations, no stress indicators, no material labels. It looked like something from a much older time, that he almost said something. He decided not to. Talus looked at the sketch for a long moment. His expression did not change. He turned back to his own hollow dash table. To the end of the session, Sovol walked the room. When he reached Dara's desk, he stopped. He looked at the sketch without speaking. Then, what style is this proportioning based on? Feel knife. Working blade. The handle sits low, so you don't lose grip when your hands are wet. Sovol looked at the sketch once more. Then he walked on. Instructor Moro had been standing near the back wall. He walked past Dara's desk on his way out, slowed for just a moment, looked at the sketch, and kept moving that he did not say anything. But he did not look away quickly either. Outside in the hall, Grin said to Talus. She did not even use the design table. No, Talus said. That will hurt her grade. Talus was quiet for a moment. Then, Moro stopped. Grin had no answer for that. They walked on in silence. The smell of the forge hit before the door was even fully opened. Tea was a good smell, Grin had always thought. Hot metal and carbon and the faint bite of flux. It was the smell of a thing becoming something else. He had liked it from the first day he stepped into a forge room, years before the academy. Today, every student had been given the same starting block, a thick bar of standard high-grade alloy, the same weight, the same dimensions. The task was simple. Produce a single-edged blade within 3 hours. Not a perfect blade, not a graded masterwork, a functional blade. Sovol would assess method and decision-making, not just the final result point 3 hours. 1 bar. Any approach. Grin worked quickly and with purpose. He had done exercises like this before. He used the calibrated tongs, the temperature regulator set to the precise softening point for this alloy, the digital angle guide that ensured his bevels were consistent. He moved through each stage with the confidence of someone who had studied and prepared. Around him, the other students worked in their own rhythms. Some were slower. Some were already shaping by the 30-minute mark. Talus was unhurried but efficient, his large hands managing the material with surprising delicacy. Dara was at the far end of the forge bench. She was heating the metal longer than anyone else. Grin noticed it because the color of her bar had passed the standard working temperature, and she had not pulled it yet. The alloy was moving toward a brighter orange. That would make it more responsive, but also harder to control precisely. When she finally pulled it, she did not place it on the shaped anvil insert that the other students used. She used the flat face of the main anvil. She did not use the digital angle guide. She tilted the blade by EY at 1 point. She pressed 2 fingers of her gloved hand against the flat of the partially shaped metal for just a second. A temperature check. Not from the gauge mounted on the bench. From touch. Grin pulled his attention back to his own work. The 3 hours passed. Sovol walked the line with Muro beside him, looking at each blade in turn. He picked them up, turned them, tested the edge with a careful thumb. He asked short questions and listened to the answers that he reached Grin's blade. Grin explained his process, the temperature curve, the angle decisions, the finishing passes. Sovol nodded, said, "Clean work." Wrote something on his board that he moved on to Talus, then to 2 others. Then he reached Dara. Her blade was not what Grin expected to see. It was not polished. The surface had texture, the small marks of hammer work still visible. The edge was not symmetric in the way the other blades were. It curved slightly, in a way that looked almost like an error until you looked at it longer. Sovol picked it up, he did not put it down quickly, he turned it. He held it at different angles. He ran his thumb near, but not on, the edge in a testing motion, close enough to feel the air resistance. Then he actually tested the edge, not with a machine. He pulled a single fiber from the edge of his sleeve, held it vertical, and lowered it onto the blade that IT split. Sovol set the blade back down. He looked at it for another moment. Then he looked at Dara. "What tradition is this from?" he asked. "Old Earth," she said. "Appalachian region. Stock knife style. My grandmother made them this way." "Your grandmother was a blade maker. She made everything she needed. Blades were part of that." Sovol was quiet. Muro, beside him, was looking at the blade with an expression Grin could not quite read. Not surprise exactly. Something more like recognition. Sovol did not give Dara the highest mark. Her blade had not followed the method criteria the exercise was built around. No documented temperature readings, no angle measurements, no process notes. Those were part of the grade. But he did not grade it the same way as the others either. He marked it separately on his board in its own column. Then he said to the class, "I will need to review the evaluation criteria before next session." No one said anything. After the class cleared out, Grin stayed to clean his station. He finished, picked up his tools, and then stopped. Dara's blade was still on the bench where she had left it. She had gone without taking it. He did not know if that was deliberate or forgotten. He looked at it. Then he picked it up. He turned it the way Soval had. He looked at the edge. It was not straight in the way the course valued. But looking at it now, in his hand, he understood that the curve was not random. It followed the line of a natural gripping motion. If you were cutting with this blade, that curve would work with your wrist instead of against it. He pressed his thumb gently toward the edge to test it. Not all the way, just enough that IT was enough that a thin line of red appeared on his thumb before he had registered any pressure at all. That he set the blade down carefully. He looked at his thumb. Then he looked at the blade again. That he left without saying anything to anyone. But that night, he pulled up the entry on Appalachian blade traditions in the Galactic database. There were 4 short paragraphs. He read them 3 times. There was a lot the 4 paragraphs did not explain. The slide was titled, "Human Civilizations, Blade Development Overview." It was one of the thinner slides in Soval's history lecture. Most species got 3 slides minimum. The Keth, Grin's people, had 7, including 2 dedicated to the ceremonial blades used in pre-industrial trade agreements. The Soreth had 5. Even a species that had been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries had more documented blade history than what was on that single slide about humans. Soval read from it without apology, but also without much enthusiasm. Humans are classified as late adopters of refined metallurgy, with early and extensive use of improvised cutting tools across all continental regions. Bladecraft formalized relatively late in their developmental timeline due to rapid industrialization following a prolonged pre-industrial period. He moved to advance the slide. Dara raised her hand at IT. Was the first time she had raised her hand in 3 sessions. Soval paused. The class turned. "Can I add something?" she asked. "Go ahead," Soval said. She did not stand. She stayed in her seat and spoke at a normal volume, which was enough because the room was very quiet. "Humans did not arrive at blade making late," she said. "We arrived at factory-made blades late. Those are different things." Soval said nothing. He was listening. "We were making cutting tools before we had fire in the way we understand fire now. Flint knapping, shaping stone by striking it with another stone, produces an edge thinner than most surgical instruments made today. People were doing that 2.5 million years ago. Not as a craft, not as a ceremony, because they needed to eat." The room was still. "Obsidian," she continued. "It's a volcanic glass. When it fractures correctly, the edge is a single molecule thick. Humans learned to shape it with a piece of antler or bone, using only hand pressure. No heat, no tools that weren't also made by hand. The result cuts cleaner than a steel scalpel." Grin found that he had stopped writing. "There were people on my continent, still alive when my grandmother was young, who could take a river stone and a harder rock and produce a working blade in under 20 minutes. Not a rough blade, a blade shaped to purpose, balanced, with an intentional edge geometry. Just stone on stone and knowing where to hit." Soval set down his presentation stylus. "We did not skip the long period," Dara said. "We lived in it for a very long time. Long enough that it became part of how we think about cutting tools. The instinct is still there. It does not go away just because we have forges now." She stopped. She had said what she needed to say. The silence lasted several seconds. Talus spoke first. His voice was low and careful, the way it always was when he was genuinely interested in something. "Is flint knapping still practiced?" "On Earth now." Dara nodded. "My cousin does it for fun. He makes arrowheads. He sells them at markets. He also works in a hospital." Talus wrote something on his tablet. Grin realized his mandibles were not moving. He closed them. Soval picked up his stylus again. He looked at the slide for a moment. Then he looked at the class. "I will be updating this slide," he said simply. That he advanced to the next topic. The lecture continued, but the room felt different than it had before Dara spoke. Like something that had been leaning slightly had been set straight. After the session ended, Sovol remained at the front of the room while students gathered their things. Most left quickly. There was a break between sessions, and the meal hall filled fast. Gren left, then stopped outside the door. He told himself he had forgotten something. He went back in. Sovol was speaking quietly to Dara, who had not moved from her seat. "Would you be willing to demonstrate?" Sovol was saying. "Not for a grade. Not as part of the formal curriculum. As a contribution to the course. Primitive technique, stone, bone, whatever you need. I would like the class to see the process." Dara considered it. "Not for long. What materials would I have access to?" "Whatever you specify. Moro can source from the station's raw material inventory. Unprocessed. Pre-industrial equivalents." "Then yes," she said. Sovol nodded once. "Next week. I will arrange the time." Gren stepped back before either of them noticed him in the doorway. He walked out into the hall and kept moving. He thought about the 4 short paragraphs in the Galactic database. He thought about 2.5 million years. He thought about stone on stone and knowing where to hit. He had scored in the top 4% of applicants for this course. He was beginning to understand that the database had very little to say about the thing Dara carried with her into the classroom each day. The thing that was not in any database at all. The meal hall was loud when he arrived. He sat down with his food and did not taste much of it. Word had spread the way things do on a small station. The session was listed as an academic observation, open attendance, ungraded and formal. Sovol had sent a brief notice to the neighboring courses. Moro had said nothing about it to anyone, which somehow meant that everyone knew by the time the class gathered in the main forge room. There were 14 people where 8 usually sat. Students from other disciplines leaned against the back wall. One instructor, Gren, did not recognize had taken a chair near the door. Talus had arrived first, which was unusual, and had chosen a seat with a clear line of sight to the demonstration table. Moro had laid out the materials that morning. Gren had looked at them when he arrived. There was nothing on that table that belonged in a modern forge room. A lump of dark volcanic glass, obsidian, Gren recognized it now. A piece of antler, 3 river stones of different sizes, a section of bone, dense and pale, a small pile of coarse animal hide. That was everything. No tools, no power, no heat source. Dara arrived the same way she always did, without announcement, without hurry. She set her notebook on the bench behind her, looked at the materials once, and picked up one of the river stones. She did not explain what she was about to do. She did not look at the audience. She began. The first strikes were orientation. She was reading the obsidian, Gren realized, learning its structure before committing to a direction. The way she held it changed. She found a platform on its edge, a flat angle, and struck precisely that a flake came free that it caught the light as it fell. Even from several seats back, Gren could see that the edge of that flake, a thin curved piece no bigger than his palm, was not rough. It was a continuous, clean arc from a single hit. She kept working. What Gren had expected was something slow and uncertain. The image he had in his mind was of early civilization, of something fumbling toward a result. What he saw was nothing like that. Her movements were deliberate and economical. She wasted nothing. Each strike removed exactly what she intended and nothing more. She was not chasing the shape. She knew where it was before she hit the 10-minute mark. The object in her hands was recognizably a blade in progress. 20 minutes. It had a defined spine and edge. And 01 in the room was talking. At some point, Gren noticed that the student beside him from another course, somebody he did not know, had stopped breathing through their mouth and was breathing through their nose instead, very quietly, the way people do when they're trying not to make sound. Dara paused. She picked up the piece of antler. She shifted her grip on the obsidian and began using the antler tip to press, not strike, applying controlled force to tiny points along the edge, removing small, precise flakes one at a time. Her face did not change. Her hands did not shake. Gren heard Talus, very quietly, say something to himself. Not to anyone else, just to himself. She is not making a blade. She is doing what the blade wants. Gren thought. That is not a metaphor. 37 minutes, she set down the antler. She held up the blade that was thin, truly thin, thin enough that when she angled it toward the light panels above, light moved through it. Not much, just at the edges. Just enough. The shape was curved and careful, a form that looked inevitable, like it could not have come out any other way. Sovol stood up from his seat. He did not go forward immediately. He looked at the blade from where he was. Then he walked to the table that he did not ask to hold it. He asked, "May I?" Dara handed it to him. He held it the way a person holds something they recognize as worth being careful about. He looked at the edge. Then he took a single hair from his own head, held it horizontal, and lowered it toward the edge. It divided without resistance. Sovol stood there for a moment. The room waited. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. "Since I was 6, Dara said. "My grandmother started me on flint before obsidian. She said obsidian punishes impatience." Sovol set the blade down on the table, gently. He turned to face the room. From the back, Muro began to clap. Slowly. Once, twice, 3 times. He did not look embarrassed about it. Nobody joined him, but nobody thought it was wrong either. To the student from another course, one of the ones leaning against the back wall, raised a hand and said, "Are all humans able to do this?" Dara thought about it. She gave the question the same seriousness she gave everything. "The ones who grew up paying attention," she said. The room was quiet for another moment. Then people began to breathe normally again, and the sound of the station came back in, the hum of recycled air, the distant sound of other sessions, the small mechanical sounds of a living ship. Grin looked at the obsidian blade on the table. 37 minutes. Stone and antler and 2.5 million years of memory in a pair of scarred human hands. That he thought about his forge score. His top 4%. He thought, "I have been studying the subject. She has been living inside it. Those were different things." Sovol had cleared the desks from the center of the room. He had pushed them to the sides and set out chairs in a rough circle instead. No projected slides. No materials on the benches. Just chairs in a room and 8 students who had been told to bring nothing but themselves and whatever thoughts they had. "Today," Sovol said, taking a seat in the circle like everyone else, "we are not making anything. We are asking something." He looked around the circle once. What is the purpose of a blade? The class had been answering questions like this for most of the semester. It should have been easy. A few students shifted in their seats. Then answers began to come. One student said, "Utility. A blade is a tool. Its purpose is to perform cutting functions that cannot be performed otherwise." Another said, "Art. The blade as a refined object, the purpose of which is to express mastery and carry cultural meaning." Grin said, "Precision. A blade's purpose is the exact application of force along a controlled line. This is why bladecraft is a discipline, because precision is not accidental." Talus said nothing yet. He was watching the others. Sovol listened to each answer. He did not nod or disagree. He just listened. Then, when the first round had finished, he asked again, "Before utility, before art, before precision, before any of those things, what is the purpose of a blade?" Silence.it was a different kind of silence than the room usually produced. Not the silence of people who did not know. The silence of people who were realizing they had been answering a different question than the one being asked. Dara said, "To make sure the one holding it gets to go home." Nobody spoke. The words sat in the center of the circle and did not go away. Sovol looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the floor, the way he did when he was working through something. Then he looked up at the class. "Yes," he said, "that is the first purpose. Everything else came after." He stood and began to move, not pacing, just thinking on his feet. Most species in this galaxy industrialized quickly, from stone tools to metal tools to factory production in a compressed period. The long era, the period where every tool was made by hand under immediate need for direct survival, was short for most of us. Short enough that it is history. Short enough that it is in a database and not in the hands. He paused. Humans spent an unusually long time in that era. The evidence is in the archaeological record, but more than that, it is in what they carry forward. The instinct for what a blade is fundamentally for. Not ceremony, not engineering, not art. He glanced toward Dara. Survival. Grin turned the idea over. He thought about his answer, precision. He believed that answer. He still believed it. But he understood now that it was not the first answer. It was a later answer. An answer that was possible only because someone a long time ago had already solved the first problem. Talus spoke for the first time. Does it feel different? He asked Dara. Making a blade with the old method versus making one in the forge. Dara was quiet for a moment. The class had learned what her silences meant. She was not avoiding the question. She was making sure her answer was true. The forge makes a better blade, she said. The old way makes a better maker. Talus wrote it down. He wrote it down the same way he wrote down documented facts. Not because someone told him to, but because it was the kind of thing that should be kept. Grin found that he was also writing it down. He had not decided to. His hand had just done it. Sobel sat back down. This is what this course has been missing, he said quietly. Not the technique. The technique is in the books. What has been missing is the reason the technique matters. Not academically. Actually, he looked around the circle. A blade made with full knowledge of its first purpose is not the same as a blade made without that knowledge. Even if the measurements are identical, even if the material is the same, the maker's understanding is inside the object. The session went on for another 40 minutes, but the conversation had changed direction entirely from where it usually went. Students were not demonstrating knowledge. They were working something out, together. Afterward, when the room was clearing, Gren stayed. He was not sure why. He cleaned up a chair that had been left crooked and then stood there in the middle of the room. Talus passed him on the way out. You look like someone rearranged your furniture, he said. Something was rearranged. Gren agreed. That evening, Gren went to the forge room. He did not sign in for a graded session. He asked Muro if he could have some time and some raw stock material. Muro looked at him. The power tools are available. I know, Gren said. I do not want them. Muro was quiet for a second. Then he opened the storage cabinet where the unprocessed bar stock was kept and set a piece on the bench. Gren picked up a hammer. He heated the metal in the open forge, without the temperature regulator. He watched the color instead. His first attempt was poor, uneven. The edge was inconsistent and the balance was wrong. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it back in the fire. He did not stop. Final exam day was quiet. Not in the room. The forge was active and the air was hot, and there was the usual sound of metal and effort, but quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that settles over a group of people who have been through something together and know it is almost over. Each student would produce a blade and then speak to Sovel and Muro about their choices. Not a long presentation, just an honest account of the decisions made and the reasons behind them. Then the blade would be assessed. The alien students went first in the order of their seat numbers. They were good. Several of them were very good. The blades were clean and precise, and the oral accounts were sharp, technically detailed, and well-reasoned. Sovel listened to each one carefully and wrote notes without expression. Muro handled each blade and tested each edge. Grin went forth. His blade was different from anything he had produced before. He had gone into the final exam having made 6 practice blades over the past 2 weeks, all by hand, without digital tools, in the unscheduled forge sessions he had been doing late in the evenings. The practice showed. This blade was not as mechanically perfect as his earlier work. But it was not trying to be, he said on the table in front of Sovel and Muro. I used hand hammer method, he said. No angle guide. Temperature by color. The process marks are visible on the surface. I kept them there. I wanted the blade to show who made it. Sovel picked it up. He turned it. His expression was difficult to read. The edge geometry is not perfect, Gren continued. I know that, but it holds a consistent bevel from heel to tip, and the balance point is deliberate. I decided those things mattered more than surface finish. He paused. Then he said, I also wanted to understand what Dar showed us, that a blade does not have to hide the maker, that the marks of making can be part of what the object is. Sovel wrote something on his board. He wrote more than he usually did. Muro said nothing, but he turned the blade over once more before setting it down, in the way people do when they want another moment with something. Talus went next. His blade had a carved handle. The carving was not deep, small, careful work, geometric lines and a pattern Grin did not recognize. The blade itself was forge-made and clean, but the handle was done entirely by hand tools, without power. I asked Dara to show me the technique. Talus said simply, "The carving." She spent one evening showing me. I practiced for a week. The result is mine. He looked at Dara across the room. He gave a small dip of his head. Not theatrical, just honest. "I want to say that in front of the class." Dara returned the acknowledgement with the same small movement. A single nod, clean and sufficient. Dara went last. She carried two things to the table. The first was a forge-made blade. When Muro picked it up and ran his usual edge test, he was still for a moment before setting it down. When Soval tested it after him, he was equally still. The blade was, technically, the finest in the room. There was no debate about that. The geometry was exact, the balance was precise, the finish was consistent. It was what full knowledge and full skill looked like when they came together. The second thing she set beside it was a knife. Old, small. The handle was worn smooth from use. The blade was dark and slightly curved and had the look of something that had been maintained for a long time by someone who understood it. "The forge blade is my exam work," she said. "The other one I brought to explain something." She picked up the old knife. "This was my grandmother's. She made it. She used it her whole life. It is not as precise as what I made for the exam, but it is the reason I know how to make what I made for the exam." She set it down gently. I wanted Soval and Muro to see both. "So the grade goes with one blade, and the reason goes with the other." Muro looked at the old knife for a long moment. Then he looked at Dara. "Your grandmother would have passed this course," he said. "She would have taught it," Dara said. Muro smiled. It was brief, but completely genuine. After the exam, the students gathered in the hall outside in the loose, easy way of a group that had finished something difficult and was not yet ready to separate. There was talking and some noise and the relaxed feel of pressure released. Grin found Dara near the end of the hall, leaning against the wall, her notebook in her hands. He did not say anything long. He held out his exam blade. Handle first. She looked at it. Then she reached to her belt and unclipped the old knife, her grandmother's knife, and held it out the same way. They looked at each other's blades for a moment. "I understand better now," Grin said. "That was always enough," Dara said. Later, when instructor Soval submitted his end-of-semester report, he listed one student under the category of outstanding contribution. Beside the name, he wrote 3 words he had not written in 19 years of teaching. Reminded us why.